Okay, we're rolling.
Okay, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 7th of July, 2006, approximately 9:30 a.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
James Moredock, and my date of birth is 7/30/23. My place of birth is Rice's Landing, Pennsylvania, which is on Monongahela, south of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Hold on a second. Okay, go ahead.
All right. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
Just the high school. I didn't go to college for one semester. I was thinking I could be an officer, but that was too late as far as the war was concerned. So I volunteered and went in.
Okay. Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, I was in Baltimore, Maryland. I was working in the Glenn Martin aircraft factory, and that's when I came back to Pennsylvania. Went to college for a while. Worked in the coal mine so I could get a little money and into the Navy.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
It's hard to believe.
Mm-hmm. Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
Yeah, I knew where
You
Pearl
did?
Harbor
Okay.
was.
A lot of people at the time didn't.
Yeah, a friend of the family, or my sister's friend, was in Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
I was quite concerned about that.
Now, couldn't you have kept a job in the defense industry, or didn't you want to?
No,
Stay there.
maybe I could, but
Mm-hmm.
they'd have taken me sometime during the war, and I'd rather go in. Everybody else was going.
Okay. Now, you said you enlisted.
Yes.
Why did you select the Navy?
Well, some of my friends were going into the Navy, and I thought it was a good deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You enlisted in 43?
Yes.
March of 43, okay. Where did you have your induction?
Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm. And where did you go for basic?
Bainbridge, Maryland.
Okay. How long were you there?
I think it was 6 weeks.
What was basic like?
Well, just military marching. We did some boxing and other calisthenics, and it kept us busy so that we didn't have to worry too much about what we were up to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now you ended up, you mentioned here in electrical
Yeah.
area. Now how did you end up in there?
Well, at Bainbridge they interviewed us, and they assigned me to the fire control school up in Newport, Rhode Island, and I probably should have gone for the Navy Air Force, but because I'd worked on airplanes, but instead I ended up in fire control, and it was pretty interesting in the electrical school.
Mm-hmm.
How long was that school? Do you remember?
I think that was another 6 weeks, or maybe 2 months. I'm not sure. The record would show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. What things did you learn there?
Well, electrical currents, mainly it was direct current, because that's the systems they had on the ships, and servo motors and solenoids, and how to keep them operating.
Now with fire control, it meant that you operated the turrets and so on, or the guns?
Well, yeah, but we didn't have turrets. We just had open guns.
Oh, you were on a destroyer escort. Yes, that's right. Okay.
And we had 20 millimeters, which had electrical sighting, and a 40 millimeter, which had a sight that was offset from the gun, and that controlled the gun. And then we had another electrical system up on the bridge which controlled the 3-inch guns. There were 3 of those on board, but they had to use matching dials, so that when you were sighting, you had to make sure that the gunners on the guns had the dials matched to where you were pointing.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you didn't get near your target. That didn't work too good if you were too quick.
Mm-hmm.
Were you kept busy with the electrical systems? Were there a lot of problems?
No, I didn't have much.
Not much to
That's
do.
the odd thing. Everything was all sealed up.
Mm-hmm.
Something went wrong, you took it, when you got back to shore, you got another unit and replaced the bad one. And it wasn't that much. And one thing we always had to keep checking was the hedgehog system, which it had firing pins that you put the hedgehog in.
Mm-hmm.
So you used an electrical tool to make sure that circuit would complete when you fired it. And most of the time I was working with the gunner's mates.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Keeping the guns
Now,
on.
when were you assigned a ship?
I think I mentioned it in there. I'm not certain. It'd be in that.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we don't. Oh, okay, October, I think it is. October of 40?
Yeah, probably.
Yes. So what ship were you assigned to?
That was the Flaherty DE-135.
So now this was a destroyer escort.
Yeah.
All right. How long were you on the Flaherty?
Well, I was assigned to it for 18 months, but there was an interval in which I went to a fire control school at Norfolk for about 6 weeks, and that was a period of time it took to go across the Atlantic and come back.
Okay.
So I ended up there.
So you were assigned to Atlantic escort duty?
Yes.
Basically. Describe your duty on the Atlantic then with the Flaherty.
Well, much of the time we were on watch for submarines, and that was around the clock, the 24-hour watch. We stood watch for 4 hours on, well, I usually was on a 20-millimeter gun just in case they come to the surface, and then long enough for them to get the crew to battle stations. And that was, depending on where we were. We know in the North Atlantic, well, it was pretty rough duty because you'd be pretty cold from the winds and the rain and the breeze off the lake, off the ocean.
Any encounters with subs?
What's that?
Did you have any encounters with German subs?
After I was assigned, the first trip we made over to Gibraltar, and we took a convoy. There was, I don't know, must have been a couple hundred ships in it. And just as we got to Gibraltar, we had a submarine contact, and then we escorted, but it didn't hit any ships. But we went on into the Mediterranean with them, and then the British took over and escorted them on into Italy. And we heard after we got back to Casablanca that once that convoy got to Italy, where the Germans' planes flew in and bombed it pretty bad. I think that submarine must have come to the surface and let them know they were coming, and then they had the German Air Force ready for them. So they took a pretty good beating. And there was when we contacted that submarine, there was a troop ship, a big ocean liner, and the minute contacted it, the whole submarine had a system, a whole task force had a system for reorienting the ships, and that troop ship disappeared in the middle of the convoy so that the sub couldn't get to it. I thought that was a pretty slick maneuver.
How many trips did you make across the Atlantic? Do you recall?
I'd say 6 or 7. And we'd usually stop at Casablanca, except for one.
What was the Atlantic like in a DE?
Well, we were such a small ship compared to the...
What was it like to be on that ship during storms and so on in the Atlantic?
Well, you had to strap yourself in the bunk when you slept, otherwise you'd end up falling out on the deck. And it wasn't a pleasant place to be, but it was duty. And but the worst worst thing was we got into a bad storm, and instead of going over the waves, we went right through one. I was on watch, and I was on the gun deck. I had about, which is quite high, and there was about a foot of water on that deck all of a sudden. At that time, the storm tore the 3-inch gun shells right off the front of the ship, so we felt pretty lucky that the darn things didn't explode. The depth charges were flying around in the magazine, and all kinds of scary things as far as we were concerned. We didn't know what could have happened.
How was the food aboard ship?
Oh, it was very good, except for a short period of time. We would go to Casablanca. We'd have a supply, so we'd get to Casablanca, then we'd end up resupplying the ship and fueling it, and coming back. So the food was usually good supply.
What kind of entertainment did you have on the ship? Did you ever get movies?
A movie once in a while. Yeah, we had one movie. It wasn't too good idea. They had one of Lon Chaney and this Wolfman. Howling at the moon, and this one kid took it to heart, and he went out that night and was walking around the ship howling all the time. He went a little crazy. We had one young little guy. He was pretty fond of him, but he went in and he said, "I'm going to cut your throat," and he had a knife. And he grabbed the kid, and the kid bounced out of that bunk and never went back to sleep.
Now, you had a kind of an amusing story in here about one of the stewards.
Yeah, well, when we got the first submarine, why, that was on Easter, and the skippers asked him where he was during the action, and he said, "So I was down in the head cleaning my skivvies." So he kind of spoke for the whole crew. We got scared pretty bad, because it was, well, the following day I was replacing the shells for the ammunition and magazines for 20 millimeters, and the gunner's chief come around, and I was shaking so much I could hardly get him in the darn thing. He asked me what was the matter, and I said, "Well, yesterday when the action was going on, I was pretty calm. I was just watching what was happening. But now I'm beginning to think those could have been the lucky people and sunk us, and we'd have been fish food." He said, "Yeah, I know what you mean."
How many on a crew were in your crew?
Well, I always thought there was quite a few, but I guess there was about 150.
Now, how many blacks did you have on the ship, the stewards?
I'd say they were all stewards, and I think it must have been 8 or 10.
Now, what kind of assignments did they have during an action? Did they have any assignments at all?
Yeah, they were usually assigned to repair. If they had a shell come through, where they'd have to plug it up and make sure we didn't sink.
What were relationships like within the crew? Did everyone get along pretty well?
Yeah, and the stewards, they mixed with the crew, and they were pretty good. Pretty nice bunch of guys.
They probably took care of the crew too, giving them food and whatever they needed, right?
Well, no, they couldn't get away with that because the officers bought their own food, but we ate well anyway. So, and the officers had their own food lockers, which I imagine they ate well because they were in the officers' mess.
What were your officers like?
Well, there was good officers and there were not so good officers. And we were pretty fortunate to have one young officer, because one of the ships one night was a chatelaine, and they thought we were a submarine and they were going to ram us. And this officer turned all the lights on, and they realized they were coming for us and kind of pulled away. And we were lucky he was there to turn the lights on. And then there was another officer, though, that was in control of a 40 millimeter. And when we went into action, he wouldn't order to fire the gun. He just stood there and watched. And he didn't want to get involved in the action. And I never thought much of him. And one night he was on the deck on the bridge, And I swear that I saw lights flash on the horizon at different times, as though somebody had opened a door. A red light showed up, and I reported it to him, and he said, "Oh, that's just the stars bouncing off the water." And he wouldn't call radar or sound, or the sound operators, just check out the area to see if they could pick anything up. But he'd always avoid anything that might cause some action, and I never thought that was a good idea. Because they might be lucky and slip in where we are.
Yeah, yeah. Now you also had a story in here about when you were firing on a German submarine, one of the German crew members.
Yeah.
Could you tell that?
The young German sailor come out of a hatch. There was one about halfway between the conning tower and the bow, and he come out of there and he ran the full length of the ship and dove into the water. And everybody on the ship, yay, went yay! They were watching the Olympics. I always thought he was a lucky son of a gun. I don't think anybody shot at him. I think they turned the guns away from him because he had, but somebody must have made a deal with him on the ship. And
They didn't pick him up or anything?
oh yeah, they picked them all up. They'd always jump off of the ship, off their submarine, opposite from where we were firing at them. So they were protected until the sub sank.
Now you were in on the capture of the a German submarine that was the U-505.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that, please?
Well, when we got the first submarine, it stayed up a long time, and fortunately we fired a torpedo but missed. So they realized that this submarine was going to stay on the surface long enough. And the skipper who was in charge of our destroyer escorts, commanding the escorts for the carrier, he was a former submariner. And he said, if the next one stays up that long, we're going to bring it back. And darn if it didn't, and they put a crew in a boat and went over. They jumped into that submarine, closed all the valves, grabbed the decoding machine and got it back on the ship. And then they started towing it with a carrier. And that's when the food went bad, because we were on our way to Casablanca, but we couldn't go to Casablanca. They didn't want anyone to know we had it. And so we turned around and started to tow that thing, and that carrier couldn't tow it very fast. And so we took us several days to get back to Bermuda. They eventually sent a tug out, and then the tug had some speed. We pulled it right into to Bermuda, and then we really ate well. But while we were coming back, the only thing we had was cornbread. Day after day. The carrier stopped by and give us some ice cream one day. That kind of brightened us up. But it didn't look too good for us for quite a while until we got back to where we could eat. And we ate real well in Bermuda.
That must have been quite a prize to bring a German sub back.
Yeah, and well, they gave us a presidential unit citation for it, and then the fellows that jumped on the submarine, they ended up with quite a few medals, Navy medal and some others, I think. And,
Now what happened to the crew?
They jumped off.
They just went over to the side and then thought it would sink.
Yeah, and then after they captured it, why the ship, one of the ships went over and picked them all up and escorted them to the carrier, and that's what we did every time. Actually, they didn't lose too many crew members because they did abandon and get away from that submarine so that they didn't get hit.
Now, what was the carrier group that you were with?
It was a Guadalcanal.
Oh, okay.
And they had planes, so when we first got in contact with them, the pilots were from the Enterprise. The Enterprise had sunk in the Pacific, and these boys were pretty hot pilots, and they'd fly in any kind of a storm. And it was amazing some of the flying they did on that carrier, because it wasn't a long flight deck, but they managed to hit that. In a storm, why they'd wait until the tail of the carrier went down. That's when the planes would hit it, and then they'd run up the deck and be caught by the
Tail hook?
tail hook and cable one. But well, I thought they were great. But eventually they'd have trained pilots that they'd just put to sea, and they didn't do quite so well.
Were there any other incidents that you'd like to mention?
Well, the pilots, one day the plane went off the front of the carrier. It was the first plane off, and something happened, and he just went into the ocean. That was the last you saw of him. And right away they put every pilot who was available in a plane and sent them off that carrier so their nerves wouldn't stop them. And I didn't think that would be, I wouldn't want to be in their situation, but anyway, they did a good job. And then after we captured the submarine, why, we could tell what the Germans were saying when they talked to each other. They did a lot of talking, chattering over the radio, because it must have been a lonely thing out there. And but since we knew what they were doing, we knew right where they were. And one night, a plane was able to catch two submarines. There were the submarine that was refueling and supplying this other submarine, and he went down and hit them with bombs and blew those submarines, one submarine apart. I never know whether he got two of them or not, but there was one German blown right off the deck, and they picked him up. He was pretty badly wounded, but he was determined that he was going back to Germany, and Hitler was going to give him the Iron Cross. He didn't know how far it was from the United States back to Germany.
You were on the Flaherty the entire time you were in service?
Yeah.
Okay. When were you discharged?
Was it 46?
Oh, yes, you have here the
Yeah.
March of 46, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
So that was just about 18 no, I was on the ship about 18 months. I was in the Navy for 3 years. And
okay. Did you ever get to see any USO shows at all while you were in the service?
well, yeah, at the school up in Newport, Rhode Island, before I went to sea, why, they had one there. That's about the only one I got to see, because we were running back and forth all the time.
You never got much time in other countries then? You just basically were at sea most of the
Well,
time?
just Africa.
Uh-huh.
And then we stopped in, at one time, I don't know how we happened to be in the area, but we ended up in Porto Delgado, Portugal. Of course, they were neutral, so they wouldn't let us go ashore. But we refueled there. The tanker come in and refueled us. Didn't supply us with any food, so but we ended up, so we could get back to Casablanca and pick up the crew, pick up the task force there. And so, but that was a beautiful place. I always wanted to go back and see what the rest of the island was like.
Okay, after you were discharged, did you make use of the GI Bill at all?
Yeah, I went to Penn State and got a degree in agriculture, agronomy.
How about the 5220 Club? Did you ever use that?
5220.
It was like an unemployment insurance, $20 a week for 52 weeks?
Yeah, I guess when I first got out, I only used it for a few months because I ended up, since I was working in the coal mines before I went, they let me go back to the coal mines when I come out so that I could make enough money to start the college, and made a couple $1,000s for a few years in college. That helped a lot.
Okay. Did you join any veterans organizations at all?
American Legion.
Are you active or?
Well, I belong, but I don't.
Okay.
I stop in once in a while to see how they're doing.
Okay. Do you ever stay in contact with anyone that was in service with you?
No, I kind of wished I had, because the task force had a reunion at one time, and they had the reunion in Chicago, where that submarine was.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's where.
And they invited the German crew
Oh, really?
that was on that submarine to come over, and they were at that reunion.
Oh, that would have been interesting.
And one of the things they were talking about, the captain of that submarine, he was so despondent that after they captured him, while he was in prison someplace in the States, where he hung himself. And I kind of think the crew really gave him give him a hard time because they didn't think he should have given up the ship. But if they hadn't, they probably would be dead Germans.
How do you think your time in the service had an effect or changed your life?
Well, made me realize I had to get myself educated and get a good position and work hard. But the one thing that I was on a ship one night and talking to the officer that was on duty. We were on watch in port, I think maybe New York. But I said, gee, when I get out of this service, I'm going to have a big family. And he says, this world's too terrible to raise kids, so I'm not going to have any. I said, okay, I'll have my 3 and your 3 also. Darn if I didn't, I had 6 kids.
Now, do you ever go down to the Slater?
I was there just the other day and took some of my grandchildren with me. And they were quite impressed with the ship.
How does it feel to you to be on a similar ship to the one you were on?
Well, it kind of brought back a lot of old memories and some of the things that happened on the ship. I thought it was good to have that one ship still going. So, wasn't too bad at all.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
You're welcome. Glad to do it.